Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of educational outcomes and the point at which the government, Western governments, and pretty much universally all across the West, again, the dark clammy hand of the globalists already there, decided to budget on outcomes. So we'll set a number of children who will pass. We'll set the number of children who will go to university, the number of children who will have to get degrees or students to get degrees. We will budget that and we'll predetermine the outcomes. Now, that's obviously got disaster written all over it, which is what's happened. But let me just go through sort of the evolution of it. And I'll use Australia as the example. Now, America was ahead of Australia in creating, or pretending to create these nirvana type outcomes. And some of the ideology that I sort of saw at the time, this is when I was still at high school, that I even was sort of seeing, although I didn't quite comprehend what was going on. I remembered it and kept the details in my memory. And so when I did have a better understanding, I was able to go back, now I know what was happening back then. So now when I was at school, high school, and things were strictly pass or fail. You didn't get allowances because you were a minority group of some sort, or you were a black lesbian or something like that. It was all strictly pass. Everyone was on the same. It was a completely level playing field, completely merit. Now, if you wanted to do better in the exams, then you worked harder, you studied harder, you hit the books, and that was how you did. Now, some kids had natural advantages. Maybe they're a bit brighter than the others, or they had more of a photographic memory, or they had a home environment that was very conducive to quiet time and study, unlike, say, a family where there are 50 million kids and they were, the place was in a permanent state of mayhem, or that you could have different environments, and the poorer environments, better off environments, and so on. I remember there's a girl at school who wasn't a moron, but her mother was an alcoholic, and things were pretty rough, I think, in the house, and she was even at 14, sort of, she was really carrying the household in a lot of ways, and the drain on her and the strain upon her was manifest, and maybe she could have done better at school if she hadn't had that to worry about. I'm sure she could have. So there were situations where not everyone had exactly the same starting point or the same supportive home infrastructure and things. So there were differences there. But at the time, the ideology that particularly the teachers' unions and the Marxist activists, who were more plentiful really at the time than I realised, but who were far more circumspect in how they spoke and the level of agitation. So the brazen agitation that you see today, or has been around for a while, you didn't see back then. But there were people with definite sympathies along those lines. But a friend of mine from school, his father was a politician or something to do with politics. I can't remember what. Maybe an advisor to one of the politicians, something in that area at least. And there was some sort of a lecture going on. It was an open forum lecture in a university, and he said he was going, and he asked me would I like to go. And then I thought, who wants to go to that bullshit? And he explained what it was, and I thought, actually, I will go to that. So I went along, and part of the deal, I think, is we had free tickets. But anyway, we went along, and so I was listening to the various people speaking, and it was sort of, I wouldn't call it a debate format necessarily, but there were people putting different points of view forward, and it became apparent to me even at that age, and I would have been, 15 or something, that there were people around that perceived that the only measure of a good education was that A, there were equal outcomes, and B, everybody had a degree. So if you had ensured that, then automatically a nirvana, a paradise, a world paradise would ensue. And you see, particularly in, say, the Democrats and the leftist parties, I'm the education president, and our government is for education, and they seem to think it's some sort of magic talisman. Don't they know that it's still going to be the brightest kids are going to rise to the top in any sort of merit system? Don't they know that there's still going to be dumb kids that couldn't pass an exam to save their lives? Don't they understand that those realities still exist? So it occurred to me, even at that age, that there had to be quite a substantial denial of reality. Not every kid was equally bright. Not every kid was going to go to university, and every kid was going to get a PhD. The idea that if you force that and say, well, if PhD is where the prestige and the glory is, give everyone a PhD. Problem solved. Now, this was very much a communist view. If you look at the Soviet Union and China and so on, where they wanted to. And by the way, the Soviets did increase the literacy rate because there was a large proportion of people living on the land as farmers were moved into the cities and sent to school rather than working on the farm. Instead of getting a couple of years of school, then becoming farm workers at the family farm, they were now spending 8 years, 9 years at school. But they wanted a certain amount of kids in the communist countries. They wanted a certain amount of kids to go to university, so they just lower the standard. So, they wanted a lot of engineers. So instead of having a 5-year course for engineering, they just reduced the course to 12 months. Just bingo, done, fixed. Wave of a magic wand, problem gone, and now suddenly there are lots of engineers. Then they did things like reclassified jobs as engineering. So if you're a cobbler fixing shoes, then they would call you a transport engineer or something like that. Excuse me. So anyway, I've still got that hay fever. It won't go away. So anyway, the education system changed all across the Western world, Australia too, after a while, where they began to budget things. So it's okay, well, at the moment, on a merit-only system, only 3% of kids that start high school go to university. Of those, about a third drop out after the first year. They can't hack it. Again, strictly pass or fail merit-based systems. So we want 50% of kids that start high school to go to university. But to do that, once you start budgeting numbers outside of any merit-based system, so we want 50% of kids to go to university, then you have to adjust something somewhere else. And of course, standards were what they adjusted. So they just lowered the pass mark. So instead of, for example, 50% being the pass mark to get, it was higher than that. But for example, 50% to get a pass mark to get to university, they would just lower the pass mark to 30%, 25%. It didn't matter. So they would keep on lowering the pass mark to get into university, to graduate to university, until such a time as the 50% or 40% or whatever it was they were budgeting was met. So they had to reduce the standards, keep on reducing until, so the percentage became the priority, not the amount of, not the quality of the kids passing. And this was a huge change, of course, because it went straight from a merit system into a budgeting system, and the governments were deciding and predetermining how many kids would go to university. Now, certainly when I was graduating to university, there was, my folks wanted me to do medicine, but I didn't make the cut. But the way it worked then was, it was a kind of an auction system, I suppose. There were 250 places at the university. Well, let's round off the numbers. Say there were 200 places at university to go and do medicine, and if it was a very good year where lots of kids got good grades, they would just take a higher mark. So say 85. Which it was, as I recall, 85%, I think, was the cutoff to get into medicine. But if a lot of kids were getting 85s and 86, they would change, say, well, the cutoff point is 90, because they still only had those 200 places to fill. So they would just take a higher grade. So kids who might have got in a slower year where there weren't that many kids getting good marks, good grades, had to miss out. And the same went for some of the other courses as well, things like, say, mechanical engineering, for example, was one I remember. In a particular year, there was a lot of kids did well in that, so they just increased. So they didn't increase the number of places, they just increased. We have to now meet a higher standard because we've still only got 200 places. There's a lot of kids competing for those 200 places, and they got good grades. So we're going to take higher grades. And that was the same for a lot. Now, it could be if it went the other way, say there was 200 places, but only 195 of the places were filled with an 85% cutoff point, then they would lower the cutoff point to 84. But they didn't deviate far from it. They'd rather have empty places than lower the standards. So if they had 200 student places but they only got 195, fine, that doesn't matter. And so they wouldn't, again, 1 mark or something maybe, but they wouldn't. They were not inclined to lower the standard just to fill the numbers. And so this was also an important point or part of a merit system. But once governments began to politicize education and say, this is the amount of kids we want to go to university, then they had to change everything. Nothing could stay the same. Once you budget outcomes, once you pre-plan an outcome that was once merit, but once you pre-plan an outcome like that, then you have to lower standards and make allowances and so on. So even the allowances process itself became politicized, so that social engineering, doctrinaire fanatics started getting in the middle of it. So if you can't speak, parents don't speak English as a first language. So the overall ideology, though, was that children or students generally are being held back with barriers, held back by Nazis. Hitler is personally holding them back from getting a PhD. If we can only remove those barriers, then everyone will have a PhD, 2 PhDs, 3 PhDs. If only we can fucking get rid of Dan Hitler. Of course, it was never like that. No, there were no barriers. The barriers were, you could say, socioeconomic circumstances were barriers, and that has always and will always be a factor. But the idea that you can wave that away and say, well, socioeconomic circumstances, we don't care about that. We'll just give you we'll double your grade, or we'll give you a 50% bonus mark just because you come from a socioeconomic disadvantage. That doesn't mean that bright kids are getting through, nor does it mean you're going to break the cycle. It still needs to be kids that are showing promise. Now, there used to be an extensive scholarship, even that's been politicized now, but there used to be an extensive scholarship program. So if you were doing reasonably well in your exams and the teachers identified you as somebody with academic promise, you're a good hardworking student, but you had socioeconomic disadvantage, then you could get a scholarship to do senior high school, a scholarship to go to university, and so on, and various other support sort of systems. Now, a scholarship on its own probably wasn't enough to pay for everything, but it certainly was a huge help to bright kids. Now, I knew some bright kids who came from, I wouldn't call them from poor circumstances necessarily, but they weren't from well-off circumstances, and they got scholarships and did rather well out of it, I thought. I'm a big supporter of scholarships. I think if there's a bright kid that his folks don't have the money or something like that, then those are people you should support. They're the people who are likely to become employers of, provide jobs for people, start businesses, invent the cure for cancer and all that sort of thing, become a rocket scientist. Those are the kids that are going to, or the students that are going to do that. Why not support them? It's a good investment, I think. But even that became politicized. Now you have to be a black lesbian to get a scholarship. So they're supporting, as always, those who are least likely to succeed and least inclined to work hard to succeed, and most inclined to think they're entitled to these things. So the scholarships, in my opinion, have been completely wasted today. But coming back to this issue of budgeting outcomes, so the government started saying, well, we want 25% instead of 3% of kids who started high school going to university. We want to have 25% of kids. Now, there was an explosion in courses and university courses, particularly the sociology courses just went hysterical. Everything, cultural studies, peace studies, gender studies, lesbian dance theory studies, black studies, you name it. A mass of courses were invented. And so the pass marks were to get into those courses. The interest wasn't filling up the courses, and not many people wanted to do those courses unless they were low IQ students who wanted to pretend, well, I must be really clever because I'm going to university, and so they lowered the pass mark. But the pass mark to get into some of these courses is like 20%. So kids who have an IQ of 90 or so, they're getting through into university, and so they started off, I think, with around 20% we want, so 3% to 20%. But I think today in Australia, at least, they're budgeting or talking about budgeting. They want 60% of kids that start high school to go to university. Now, the number of kids that made it to university, the number of kids that made it into senior high school on merit alone were between a quarter and a third. So of every 100 kids that started high school, only on or about 30 would make it into senior high school, or at least go to the graduation level. And even less than that, actually, but we'll go to the graduation exam. So say a quarter would make it all the way through to sitting for the graduation exams to university. So that's the merit. That was sort of a merit-based system. Now today, close on 90% of the kids are going through into senior high school and into the graduation thing, and girls more so than boys. But how many of those in a merit-based system would actually be there? I don't think the level of merit-based has really changed. If you look at, say, 1930s graduation to university, and then this is in Australia, 1970 graduation to university, the numbers are pretty much the same. I mean, give or take, but they're not really that different. So what you've got is that when a merit-based system existed, approximately the same amount of kids were making it through into university, in 1930 as were in 1970. So you can say a merit-based system is going. That's about the ratio. 3%, 5% at the outside are going to make it through university based on merit. They pass or fail, they pass the test, they're bright enough, they work hard enough, they're dedicated to their studies, and so on. So that's about the high end, 5%, if you're looking at a merit system only. And now we're looking at a system where it's 10 times that, 20 times that. So the kids getting waved through junior high school into senior high school are 3 to 4 times more than they were in a merit-based system. Now that merit-based system was producing on or about the same outcomes in terms of the brightest kids, getting through. So I don't think that changes. I think those numbers are about the same. 3%, 5% of the bright kids coming through. So when you look at 90% of the kids going from junior high to senior high, then you're looking at 15, 16 times a multiplier of 15 or 16 times. That means that 85%, give or take, of those kids that are going to senior high school couldn't make the cut in a merit system. They could not make the cut. So they're just dead weight, just parasites being put through the system for some sort of bullshit social engineering crap. Then the large numbers of those are going on to university, again with a grade of 20% in the graduation exam, and they're being waved through to do lesbian dance theory and gender studies and cultural studies and all this sort of stuff. All these fucking bullshit courses that just proliferate, and they're filling up those sort of courses and chewing up tax dollars, producing nothing, and being insanely radicalized to hate Western civilization and everything in the process. So we need to understand. I think we need to really come to grips with the idea of that once governments get into politicizing education to create outcomes to equity, then that they destroy the whole thing, and that we're all poorer and all the worse off for it. Even more so now, given that we've got 2, if not 3 generations of radicalized young people who believe, particularly the lower IQ ones, who now make far and away the majority of kids at university. A complete reversal of what it used to be. University was the brightest kids only. Now some of the dumbest kids in the whole fucking place are going to university. So the radicalized view that the Western world is evil and white people are Nazis and so on and so forth. So it's created a problem of unimaginable magnitude that it will take, I think, generations to unwind. I mean, what a tragedy. You've been in Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.